Last year, my Philodendron verrucosum looked like this. It kind of went downhill from there, so I think it's time for me to do something about it. Jan from the future here. I actually started this video a year ago, to be precise 14 months ago, when I first noticed my verrucosum struggling a little bit. The idea was that I give it a bit of a reset and then the plant is going to thrive to its former glory, and I'm going to create this beautiful video over the course of 12 months that show you the glow up. It's been 14 months and the plant is only now starting to grow quite nicely again. You can still see some of the rather challenged leaves down here, but the latest 4 leaves, this is the newest one over here, unfurling just started last week. They're kind of nice. So we are on an upwards trajectory, but it wasn't quite the beautiful transformation I was planning on as part of this video. But it's just a great reminder that not everything goes according to plan when it comes to plants. Now, let's have a look at what Jan in the past did to try and recover this plant, and then I'll check in with you to tell you about the journey that the plant has been through over those last 12 to 14 months, anything that I've learned, and the plant is reaching the top of its pole yet again, so it's time to do another chop and extend. And I also want to compare the growth of this plant to my second verrucosum that has definitely shot the lights out in the same period despite getting the same conditions. So I think it's a bit of an interesting observation to address as well. So lots and lots and lots happening in today's video, but let's start off chronological and give it back to Jan from the past. Philodendron verrucosum is, or is, kind of still a bit of both, my pride of joy, and I just recently turned it into my logo as well. So I'm extra upset that the verrucosum isn't really living its best life at the moment. And by at the moment, I mean really over the last few months. I feel like after the last chop and extend, it didn't really properly recover. It had spider mites on multiple occasions and I was a little bit slow to get on top of it. I think it also really didn't like the move, the change in conditions. And yeah, like overall, I just feel like it's just not really in its like happy era. Hey baby. When I first grew it, it was honestly one of the easiest growers and it was growing so fast and there was just no stopping it, but I just feel like there was this point where it's just like, right now I'm not happy and I just haven't really gotten back to getting it really happy. So I don't think it's necessarily just because I moved, because it was already starting to decline a little bit at my old place and it was growing in the same spot for years. So the conditions didn't really change, which really comes to show that sometimes it's just kind of the plant. It's just not really happy for whatever reason. It might not be super obvious, at least it wasn't super obvious to me. And sometimes I also think it might just be a combination of a few small factors that just makes it not grow to its potential. So I really want to get on top of it because I just really hate looking at these ugly leaves. And sometimes I feel like giving it a chop is just kind of shaking the plant awake. So hopefully after today, and then obviously giving it a bit of time, it's going to go back to its former glory. Now let me show you what I've done in advance or in preparation for today. I don't know, you can probably not see this at all. So there's 2 vines on this stem and I cut them both about a month ago, so they can just callus over. And yeah, so today it's time for a chop and extend. So normally when I do this chop and extend, I do the chop and extend exactly where I extended the poles previously. So all of my 180 centimeter moss poles are actually made out of 2 90 centimeter parts, and usually I just separate them. But with this one, the second shoot hasn't even made it onto the extension, so I would kind of lose that, which I don't want to do. So I'm just gonna chop it kind of down here where I just feel like the ugliness kind of starts. So I just cut the pole. I'm gonna cut the garden stake, or like not cut the garden stake, but I'm gonna remove the pole from the garden stake. Now, also a disclaimer, I know that it's still a really nice plant and it's still healthy and it's still growing. It's pushing out a new leaf at the top over here actually. So I'm really it's definitely a first world problem, but it's my pride and joy. I really love this plant, and it makes me sad to see it just survive and not thrive. I feel like it has potential to do so much more, and it's honestly, just visually, my absolute favorite plant. So I want to grow it to its best potential. Alrighty, so this is my top half. So you can see over here where I cut the stems already a few weeks ago. Nice dried out, so I can just pot this straight up. Righty, and then this bottom pole, I'm just gonna chop in between every single node. I should do that with a knife or like scissors, something better than this. One moment, please. Bye, they're just really ugly, I don't want them. So every node has rooted into the pole over here. So I just want to chop in between every node to see if any of them want to reshoot. They should, technically, but I don't know how like healthy they are. Like, I just don't know. Some roots in here, so this should reshoot, and the reason why I also chopped the leaf off so it's nice and small now, I can just put this anywhere without taking up much space, and hopefully these nodes will reshoot. We'll find out. Alrighty, easy peasy. We'll take the plant, put it in a new 20 centimeter pot. I'm happy with that. I'll chop any of the leaves that will kind of be covered by the potting mix anyway, or anything that I just deem as too ugly. And now I'll just pot it up. I fill it with some of my aeroid mix, and I just made a brand new potting mix video the other day if you're interested. Now, what I wanted to address is because whenever I do these things, people get so edgy about like me cutting plants. They're like, oh my god, how can you cut all of these leaves off? How can you just cut your plant and so on? I don't know. I feel like I think this is my 4th year in this hobby, or 4th year of growing on moss poles. I have done so many chops, and so far everything always enjoyed their chops. Like, yeah, sometimes plants die, but it was hardly ever because of a chop and extend or because of a propagation effort. If a plant dies, it's most likely because of like incorrect care or wrong conditions, or to be honest, I think worse than a plant dying is actually a plant doing nothing. It's not thriving, but it's also not dying. You're just like, well, I'm not doing terribly, but I'm also not doing well. So it's kind of like, I think that to me is actually the worst. If the plant is just doing nothing. If it's at least dying, then you're like, okay, this plant doesn't work for me in my in my conditions. But if it just does nothing, like, there's just no like conclusion. You know what I mean? Stay. Good. I put the garden stake back in. So yeah, I'm super desensitized to chopping my plants. I don't care. Actually, quite the opposite. I love chopping my plants. It's like very satisfying to me, or it's fun to me. I love change though. So I love just chopping them up, changing it, propagating them, multiplying them, just seeing how the plant reacts to it. That to me is like fun. Yeah, over the years, I feel like I noticed that my worth as a grower is not directly linked to how well my plants are necessarily growing at all times. Like, a plant not thriving does not make me a bad plant parent, or does not make me shitty at my hobby, right? That is just normal. We're dealing with plants. I mean, have a look at nature. There's plants in nature that aren't thriving and aren't doing the greatest. And that doesn't make nature terrible at being nature, does it? Yeah, I feel like I lost this fear of like, oh my god, but what if the plant dies? But what if the plant does this and whatever, you know? I'm just like, well, so be it. If it dies, then I'll get another one. I mean, what helps with that is just that the pricing of plants in Australia has calmed down a lot. Like a few years ago, these plants were all so expensive, and now most of them come out of tissue culture. Like, I rescued a verrucosum the other day for 24 bucks and had 3 plants in it. So if this dies, I'm just gonna get a new one, right? Which is obviously not what I want to do, but I'm just saying if it dies, then I could. It's not like, oh my god, if this dies, I could never replace it. And to be honest, so far, that has never happened. Maybe because I don't really care, is like, well, the less you care, the better you get at it, or something like that, right? because I'm doing it without so much pressure. Okay, one moment, I need to extend this, but I want to fill it with a little more moss. And the more experience of a grower you are, I think the more you'll realize that it is just part of the hobby. Beginners are probably more likely to have these issues of like, oh my god, I'm scared to chop my plant, I'm scared that something goes wrong, and then if it goes something wrong, it's like, oh my god, I'm such a terrible plant person, I kill all my plants, because you still want to prove to yourself that you can do it. But I'm past that stage, so I'm just living my best life. Stand straight already. So that process that what I just did, that I call it a chop and extend process, and I've got a full tutorial on it in my playlist, the moss pole playlist, which I'll always link at the end screen. Yes, I extended that quite significantly. So yeah, happy days. Now I just need to water it, but let me clean things up first because I like things in the spot where they belong. I'm just using a hook to kind of hook it on here, just so it can stay upright. Well, I'm gonna work on its watering. So I'm gonna water it from the top. So I just pop the water bottle up here so it can drain through the new moss pole, just to give it a bit of moisture. And then obviously, because I just potted it up, I'm also gonna water the substrate. And lastly, clean leaves are happy leaves. So I'm gonna clean the leaves just with some water as well. Alrighty, I gave this a thorough watering as well. Alrighty, I'll let it dry out here before I put it back. But you know my saying, proof is in the pudding. So whether or not that was a success and whether or not I'll be able to bring it back to its former glory, time will tell. And well, for you, it's a little less time because it's gonna be in the next clip already. But I have to stay patient. Alrighty, thank you so much. Now, after that, I put it back into my office and I was just hoping for it to kind of recover. But honestly, the verrucosum absolutely hated that place where I lived last year. I think it grew maybe one leaf the whole time while I was there. Because I was so disappointed with its growth, I didn't actually document a lot about this plant, but because I filmed quarterly houseplant tours, we can have a sneaky look at what happened to this plant. So I filmed a houseplant tour in August, so just a couple of months after I gave it the chop, and that's coming up now. Let's completely ignore my verrucosum because it's a bit of a sore spot at the moment. Let's move on to some happier news. Well, as you can see, I did not want to talk about this plant in that video because it was kind of just declining further post-chop, right? Which is not what you want. So clearly there was something wrong with this plant, and even the chop didn't kind of like shake it up or wake it up. Now it's hard to say in hindsight. I think it wasn't one thing that kind of made it decline. I think it was weakened by some spider mite infestations. I don't think it liked the conditions in that office, and we were also in winter, which usually is the time of the year that the verrucosum prefers. But I had a heater in that room, and it was kind of, I think, blasting at the verrucosum too directly. So it was kind of getting hot, dry air blown in its direction, which I don't think it really appreciated. And then maybe there was also some sort of root deterioration issue, or I'm not too sure, but I think it would have had to be a combination of a few things for it to really be impacted that badly. So it kind of just kept spiraling downwards even after the chop. So then in November, when it started warming up a little bit, I thought, why don't I put this in my newly built greenhouse at the time, because I know it likes the high humidity. So I popped it in the greenhouse. There we go. So we've got my verrucosum in here, and it's finally given me a new leaf. It has honestly been months. I think it's only grown one leaf since I live in this apartment, and it's been eight months. So happy days is giving me my first new leaf. That finally made it grow its first leaf again. Now, the idea was never to have it in the greenhouse for a very long time, because that greenhouse was exposed to way too much sun, and as a result of that it would get way too hot during the summer months. But at least it started kind of kick-starting the growth for this plant again. But to fit it in the greenhouse, I had to take off that extension. Now, this plant has only now reached the top of its moss pole, so it's taken almost 14 months to actually grow that bit of the moss pole that was still left. So I really did not need to put an extension on it back in the days. I was very, very ambitious. But we talk about internodal space in a second as well. And then I had to move house. So yet again, I had to change its conditions. And usually I feel like this plant doesn't deal all too well with change, but I changed it to my office in here. And the conditions are very good in there. It is a south-facing window, so it doesn't get any direct sun, which also means that that room stays the coolest during the really hot summer months, and I think the plant really appreciated that. That's when it finally started growing again. Next to that, we've got my verrucosum struggle bus, but it is recovering. So this was its newest leaf, not perfect, but look at this next one coming. It's looking really good. So I think we're on an upwards trajectory with it. So it will happen. And so I think a huge contributor was definitely conditional, but maybe by then the plant has also re-established more roots and was able to grow again and so on. So I think it was just a variety of issues that made it slowly decline over a really long period of time, and then made it have a very, very slow recovery. But I've been in this place for 8-9-ish months now, and it is finally growing again. Not super fast, like, you know, a leaf every 2 months or so, but I think that is also more so a thing of maturity. As the plant matures, each leaf is obviously getting bigger, but also each leaf takes a little while longer to create and form and unfurl and whatnot. Newest leaf is absolutely sexy with the beautiful red backs, the electric veining. It's very elongated, not so round. I don't know if that shows already, which I think is just because it's getting quite a lot of light at the moment from my plant spectrums. And beautiful hairy petioles over here as well, very nice. Now, before we get on top of this, I want to show you another verrucosum that I'm growing. Move aside, makes a bit of space. I'm sorry for the direct sun, I think it's making it a bit harder to see, but so. This is my second verrucosum, and it's a rescue plant, and I rescued a very sad looking small plant from a nursery 1 month before I gave this one a big chop. And since then, this plant has absolutely shot the lights out. I'll insert a video of when it was at its peak because it's already gone through its first chop and extend. But I propagated this plant in those 14 months or 15 months by now, yet it has still outgrown this plant by a lot. It has all of these leaves were growing in the same period of this one grew like 3 or 4 leaves. Right? Of course, it's not quite that large yet, but it started off really small and it had mealybugs to deal with and had to re-establish a root system and whatnot. So they're getting the same conditions. So I know that the conditions in themselves definitely suit my verrucosum. Otherwise, this one wouldn't be thriving. I mean, this is also now growing, but what I'm really, and it's the same type of verrucosum as well, but what I'm trying to show here is that sometimes, you know, if a plant is on a downward spiral and you haven't quite figured out why it's on a downward spiral and what to do to make it recover, it can take a long time, first of all, to kind of understand the issue, and then it can take even longer time to get on top of this issue and nurture this plant back to health. Whereas sometimes starting brand new, starting fresh is actually faster if you know that you've got conditions that suit that plant. And I know historically that I had a really good time looking after Philodendron verrucosum. It was always the best grower for me. So I'm personally really surprised at how hard of a time I'm having growing this mother plant back to health when clearly I'm more than capable of looking after a verrucosum. Something else I wanted to show you with this plant, and I actually just, oh wow, that sunlight is terrible. And I just chopped 2 bits off here. I hope all of this mixing light is fine. I hope you can see everything. I just had to make 2 chops here because this is the latest node over here. The next node was traveling up to here. So this plant had huge internodal spacing, up to 30 to 40 centimeters. Let's park this in the back. Whereas this plant, now that this plant is maturing, it's growing with much shorter internodal spacing. They're getting the same light exposure at the moment. So light exposure is not the answer why these two have different internodal spacing. It's definitely maturity. And that is something I have observed with many other plants before as well. So that's not unique to the verrucosum, but it is something I wanted to point out because specifically verrucosum has these huge internodal spacing, which is kind of a bit annoying at the juvenile stage because it's running away from you and keeps climbing and you can't kind of keep up with chop and extends, but there is end in sight. Once it matures, once it has a bit of a thicker stem, it will grow with much shorter internodal spacing. And the roots, and again it's probably going to be a pain with the sun. Why is there so much sun suddenly? It's growing some decent sized roots actually. You can probably see the red a little bit better now, and the furry petioles. Very, very nice. One other thing I wanted to show you, remember I also had the bottom part of the previous chop and extend that's been in my greenhouse the whole time. Has also done very little, honestly, I don't know why. Very, very little in 14 months, right? So yeah, did not like my greenhouse. Alright, so it's time for another chop and extend because I do need to extend this, but the pole is very wobbly in itself because this has a tiny garden stake and so on. So remember in the last chop and extend I didn't go with full poles, I actually made it a little bit taller than normal. So the first pole ends here and then my normal moss pole only starts here. So I want to bring it back to my normal chop and extends at 180 centimeter height. That is just working the best for me and has the best stability as well from what I've noticed. So doing that, so I'll end up with another little stomp down there. See if that second stomp is going better than the first one. Alright, then remove it from the garden stake because I want to give it a larger garden stake with more stability. Alrighty. And there was unfortunately no roots going into the bottom, which I'm not super surprised by. Now of course this is looking quite leggy at the bottom over here. Not necessarily my preference for it to be that leggy, but I don't want to cut it short. I want to keep as many nodes as possible because I'm still pretty convinced that each node has a root system within the moss pole over here, despite all of the difficulties that it had. And it's finally doing something. I don't want to jeopardize my work. That leaf was ugly though. That pissed me off. So, bye. Alright, I'll let that sit here so that the cut in the moss pole can dry out a little bit. I already cut the stem just a couple of minutes before I started the video actually. Sometimes I do it months in advance, sometimes I do it hours in advance, days in advance. It doesn't really matter as long as the plant has built a root system. Now remember the reason why I didn't do a normal chop and extend last time is because I wanted to actually keep that second shoot on here. That second shoot has done one leaf in 18 months. Can you believe that? And it's one of the ugliest leaves I've ever seen. So that second shoot was not worth saving, but we'll see. I will put this upstairs. Upstairs I've got a little storage area with one skylight. It just looks ugly up there, so all the ugly plants, all the rescues go there. And see if this reshoots up there. You can definitely see how this was the stem thickness, and then after the chop and extend, because I also only kept such a short part, look how the stem thickness has reduced. And thicker stem, thicker leaves. Hello my baby. Alright, there doesn't seem to be too many roots in here, so I can actually remove some of the moss from this bit. Sometimes plants have rooted too well into this bottom part and I can't remove any roots, but I mean the plant in itself is quite far away, so even if there's some roots here I'm not worried, let's say. So let's do that. I just use a chopstick to poke some of the moss out, but I am still careful. And the reason why I'm doing that is because the moss has very high water retention and I'm trying to keep my aeroid mix more aerated and chunky because I need to water the moss poles quite frequently. So the moss poles will have much more aeration and drainage than the pot has, so there's chances of just providing the pot with a little bit too much moisture. And I'm just reducing the likeliness of too much moisture building up in the pot by removing extremely water retentive components like sphagnum moss. Alrighty, that's good enough. Now fill that bottom part where I removed the moss, I fill that with aeroid mix instead. Take a new 20 centimeter pot. Bam. And I'll top it up with more aeroid mix. New garden stake. The only one I've had left was a black one. It's the same thing as the green one, just different color. Connect the first pole to the garden stake. Hello, baby. Take a new moss pole. On one side, I'm making a little cavity for the water bottle upside down technique to work later. So the water bottle upside down technique is basically me flipping a bottle upside down and then letting the water drain through it and let gravity take care of the watering. And the other end, I make sure I fill all the way, and I can reuse that moss that I took out earlier. And then this will go on top of here. Easy. Again, just using a couple of cable ties to secure it. And then, just so these poles don't twist around on top of each other, I'll also connect the two poles using a few cable ties. I feel like every second video I do a chop and extend. It's a very common thing for me to do, so if you want to have a more detailed tutorial on these steps, they're all in my moss pole playlist. You can see this process being done many times with plastic back poles, open poles, monsteras, philodendron, all sorts. Oh, look what I've just discovered. It's growing a little inflow. Here where the cable tie is pointing. That's going to be a little inflow. Bye. I do not want you to spend energy on inflows. We finally get you to grow some leaves again. I don't want you to waste energy on inflows. No, thank you. Alrighty, and here we are. I will take this plant outside, give it a good spray, just with water to have clean leaves, and then I'll water the pole as well. And hopefully this plant doesn't even notice that I've done this chop and extend. I've got a feeling that this plant is currently purely relying on the moss, on the root system within the upper part of the moss pole, which would probably also explain why it grows a bit slower. But yeah. See how we go, proof is in the pudding. There were definitely a few learnings. First of all, we got to be realistic when it comes to growing plants. Even a plant that historically has grown really, really well for me can decline at any time. That is the risk, but also the beauty of growing plants. They are living organisms and they're only as good as they are today, right? Like this plant thriving 2 years ago is not a guarantee that it's going to thrive right now. Right? So enjoy the moment, enjoy the process. If a plant is thriving, enjoy it for what it is right now. Take lots of photos, but also be realistic that a plant, just because it was thriving at one point in time, can still decline at any time as well. They are living organisms and that's just what happens. Second of all, sometimes starting a plant fresh, like I did with the rescue, where I properly put it into single node cuttings, I rerouted them properly and then I started them fresh on a new moss pole, can be faster than trying to kind of cheat yourself into stopping a downward spiral without properly investigating kind of. I thought I'll just give it a chop, it's going to kind of shake it awake and then it's going to keep growing again. Didn't do the trick. If nothing changes, nothing changes. So clearly there was something else that I wasn't really addressing that was making the plant unhappy. But that's also another learning. Sometimes you can't necessarily pinpoint exactly what's going wrong because it could be a combination of many factors that then caused the demise of the plant. It's not just low humidity or just spider mites or just you missed a watering. Maybe it's a bit of both. It had spider mites, was already weak, was then put in conditions that are suboptimal, then you forgot a watering which caused some root rot, and then all of these factors combined basically are too much for the plant to handle. Of course, ideally you always have some sort of lesson learned out of something that goes wrong, but sometimes there is no lesson learned. So I'm also not kind of like forcing myself to find a lesson just for the sake of it. Sometimes I'm just accepting that things can go wrong and I'll try again. Something else we learned is that the large internodal spacing is definitely decreasing with maturity, which is a good thing, just makes it less effort. And now I only have one plant on here and the top, ignore the bottom, but the top is still looking very lush, right? With a juvenile plant, I would definitely have to put 2 or 3 cuttings on there to achieve a similar lush look. So keep that in mind as well. At the beginning, when you have a juvenile verrucosum, you might want to double or triple plant it, but most likely 1 or 2 shoots will outperform the others anyway. So kind of naturally, as you do chop and extends, you'll probably end up with just 1 shoot, but that 1 shoot is then also going to reduce internodal spacing. So it kind of just worked out for me at least. And I think that's all the lessons I've learned from this. We're in winter over here at the moment. My plants are not living their best life. So I know my content at the moment is a little more realistic, and I actually really enjoy reading these comments where my failures kind of encourage you to keep going as well, or you feel like me showing you my failures or my struggles or things that aren't going according to plan gives you a better time, I feel like, or at least that's kind of what I read from the comments. So that's great. Like I definitely want to make sure that my channel is a representation of you know, my growth journey, and sometimes in my growth journey things are going right, and then that's what I'll show you. If things are going wrong, then that's what I'll show you. I'll be open and honest with you in what I share, and I will always speak from experience. And yes, even I unalive plants, even I struggle with plants. At the end of the day, conditions will always set the growth potential, and the conditions are not perfect in Sydney year round. So I'm also subject to that. My plants are also subject to that, and I actually really enjoy that it makes you feel better about the hobby or makes it feel more relatable to you. So I actually really enjoy that, and I hope these sort of videos contribute to that. Anyway, I'll wrap it up now. Thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, and leave a nice comment, and I'll see you next time. Bye!